or
And
on the
that's
computer.
and if that's the case, so the thing is what you don't want if it were to if it changes, you're now pulling that's going to make your old close rate look better because you've pulled that data. You've decreased the number of open jobs that became open then. It's
No, I get
I,
it,
I
but nobody
understand, I
cares
think
about
what
the.
you're asking about, but the thing this is extremely important for accurate data. If you start messing with any of that timeline, how the jobs are counted as one, or not basing it off of when they became open originally, the data is not accurate. You will end up with a artificially high close rate because you'll close jobs later, and then you're going to count that towards that period, and you're going to think, oh, my close rate's really good, but it has to be based on when they became open because that's the only way for the numbers to be equal, to have the correct relationship. So I know it seems like you would want, oh, like we closed it this quarter, we resent the quote and we closed it this quarter, which should count towards this quarter's close rate. It shouldn't, because what it feels like it should, but that in itself is the problem because it's going to artificially inflate your close rate and make you think you have a higher close rate when in fact your close rate for that quarter might be lower, while hurting your close rate in the past, which is now artificially it influences it to be incorrect because it's not in line with the number of jobs or projects that became open. I've spent so many hours like testing and agonizing over this.
So we have to change it back to recap. If somebody reaches back, calls back, texts back because of Proline's automation, 6 months later,
Yeah.
our team needs to reassign or to move back to lead, right?
I said that because it would accomplish what you're looking for. But you are right. It is hard, and that is intentional because that's not really, you shouldn't even be doing that. If even if you're resending that lead, it should not be reset when it became open. That
So
that was
this
a
is a
lead
philosophical question then.
that
So
became open
five
last
years
year.
later, 5 years later is a new lead, or is it a lead from 2023?
If you it's that is a little bit up in the air. I would almost say just like, so here's actually probably the right way to do that is to create a new project. If it's that far out, you don't know what things have changed. It should go through the process as a new project. Leave that other project in Lost or wherever it ended up, and start with a fresh project. You can copy over some of the information if you need to, but that's the way I would handle. I would say to approach that. Actually, create it, like run it as two different, so that way you have data on both. Like leave when that old project became open and got their quote and all that. Leave that the way it is and start fresh with a new project because you may end up like making some mistakes on that old project anyway, since you're going to assume the data is good. It's not necessarily going to be good. But so that's what I would say. That's what I would say there. But I think the where it's fuzzier is in the middle, where it's like, hey, it was last year, and in those situations, I'd say to be accurate, I know it's not as flattering to your close rate in the current quarter that you're trying to influence, but to be accurate, they became open last year. So if they close, that should influence that quarter's close rate, not this quarter's close rate. Now, I
Makes
will
sense.
say this, we do track in Proline, we track how many you close total in a given period. We just don't use that to calculate close rate. That is win rate, I think. Yeah, yeah. So your win rate versus your close rate is like your win rate's just your percentage. And this is I think a lot of people say close rate, but they're actually talking about win rate. Win rate is just for a given period. How many did you win versus how many did you lose? If you sold two jobs, you lost, or if you had two projects, you sold one, you lost one, you have a 50% win rate. That is not close rate though. That's win rate. So, what we do track that as well. I think it's just about which one do you want to look at? Do you want to know how how you how many jobs you sold versus lost in the given period versus do you want to know the really important thing with close rate is like you need to know out of 10, if I send out 10 quotes, what percentage of those 10 quotes did I close? And am I likely to close in the future? So that is the problem with like if you start changing the timeline where you don't count that close this year as being for Q3 of last year when it became open, then you're now not talking about apples to oranges because you're no longer talking about which percentage of the 10 jobs because you're now introducing, so you might have you're introducing additional sales in a period in which they didn't become open. So you're no longer comparing apples to oranges, if that makes sense.
That makes sense.
It's
they're two different things. They are. It's rough because you're like, if you're listening to this or watching this, you're like, what am I supposed to track? Win rate or close rate? They are two different things. You do need to understand the differences between them. And
the close rate is more important though, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, it probably is because then you can track your marketing and if there's a failure in your sales process for some reason, you're like out of 10, like you said, out of 10, how many do I close on average? It better be at least 3 or 4. Let's just say that out loud. Yeah.
Oh, and another, it's so funny when we on demos for Proline when we ask what a people's close rate, it's almost every time it's like 50%. That's people say, and it's either because they're tracking win rate, not close rate, or they're not counting their open projects against. They're just thinking about, I close. Well, I guess so they win rate because they're talking about win rate. They're thinking, I sold, or I had 2 projects. One went to sold, one went to lost. It's 50-50. It's like, it's not 50-50 because you have 8 projects that are sitting open right now. So it's it's actually 10% is your close rate. You think it's 50%. It's not 50%. It's 10%.
And people even crazier than that, like especially door knockers or just people that are in insurance are like, well, my close rate is 90% or 80, 70, 80 or 90%. I hear that so much for those types of contractors. They think they're closing every single job. I'm like, you don't understand obviously at all. You have to put enormous effort to get that one. Like it's less than 10% a lot of times.
Well, they're also typically counting. They're counting. It's a tracking failure. For as far as close rate for insurance, what you actually need to be tracking is. It gets confusing if you're not having a contingency agreement. But if you do a contingency agreement, it's the rate at which you get people to sign your contingency agreement. That also, get the job covered and go to close rate's not as meaningful a metric in the insurance space in general, but the main thing is how good are you at getting people to sign your contingency agreement. Now, if you don't do a contingency agreement, it becomes even harder to, but if you do, and that's the way you do it, you really should just be tracking it as essentially a retail job and letting the homeowner just do the thing with the insurance, right?
It is. Oh yeah. But this is what I see because I don't do, I've never done a contingency. Well, that's probably not true. I've probably done it at least a couple of times, but